Welcome to the Michael Welch Podcast. I am the hostess with the mostest, and we're going to talk your weekend watch guide here. We got some big games on the slate, a little bit late in the afternoon, but we've got a nice evening buffet laid out, so we're going to tackle it. Here we go.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat.
Oh boy, I hope you enjoyed the action so far. Kent State crushed Bowling Green last night, and Central Michigan, man, rallied down to stay in the game with Buffalo. That quarterback there, Emmanuel Jr., brought them back in the second half to stay competitive in that game. What a great Wednesday night game that was for a little MAC action there. Just a scrambling threat back there, dragging his team to stay in that one. So let's start with this Saturday, November 11th, November 12th. There we go. I'm on the right date now. Your noon slate. Let's start with some of the bummer games, just games kind of note that'll be going on. Ohio State's ranked second in the new polls. They're 9-0. They're hosting Indiana, who's 3-6. This will be the Fox noon game. Now, Ohio State's favored by 40 points. They still have a number of injuries. I assume that'll still be maybe kind of an issue. On the flip side, the Hoosiers played 3 quarterbacks last week in a Penn State loss, so I don't expect a lot of excitement there. Hopefully, Ohio State will be able to kind of get it up and running there and put some points on the board, but they've struggled recently. Of course, we're going to say it was the weather last week against Northwestern, which was certainly a factor, but they do need to probably put some style points on the board. Those are supposed to go away after the BCS era, but those still matter now in placing 4 teams for the playoffs. Notre Dame's shot all the way up to 20th. To think of how big of a swing that is to beat Clemson at home there and to hop right into the top 20. On the flip side, if they lost that game and ended up 5-4, they probably would have dropped out of like the top 40 teams. So what a crazy swing that is to jump. Probably, I think they were just outside the top 25, hanging around the top 30 as of last week. And rather than drop another handful of spots, they're up in the top 20. So how about that for the Irish? What a swing a big game like that can do. So they're 6-3. They're at Navy, who's 3-6 on ABC. So another Prime Network getting kind of a game there. You wouldn't expect the Fighting Irish to kind of fall apart here against a midshipman team that's had a rough season, but I guess you don't really know. They seem to be improving though. Quarterback play is still a problem. Payne, not so great at that position. It's going to be a run fest here. This game could be over by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Vanderbilt. Well, I guess let me say Notre Dame had 263 yards against Clemson last week. That's how they won that football game. But also at noon, Vanderbilt's 3-6. They're at number 24, Kentucky, who is 6-3. This is on the SEC network. Now, Kentucky just fallen off the radar at this point, still in the top 25, but a team that's just kind of hanging in there. Vanderbilt is Vanderbilting, unfortunately, after a good non-conference season slate. And it's just not a very enticing game on the slate there. Will Levis had 3 touchdown passes on, I think it was 13 for 19 passing last week. Just not a very impressive game slate there, and just barely beating Missouri. I'll touch on that game when we touch on Missouri and Georgia in just a moment. Also at noon, West Virginia is 3-6. They'll be hosting Oklahoma, who's 5-4 on FS1. I kind of think this will be a more interesting game. All these Big 12 games have been pretty good. Oklahoma, I would say, is improving a little bit more, but Dylan Gabriel, who's had 1 interception on the season heading into last week's game against Baylor, had 3 picks against the Bears, which was not a good showing. They lost by a possession there in that game, and they're now 5-4. Not a great showing, but they do seem to be kind of coming around as a football team. I say that with 3 games left in the season. West Virginia might be looking for a new coach at the end of the year, but I still think we could have a whole lot of points in this game on FS1. Now here's a name you don't hear very often, UConn. The Huskies are 5-5. They are hosting the Liberty Bells. No, the Liberty Flames, who are 8-1. This is also at noon on the CBS Sports Network. Now, Liberty beat Arkansas on the road last week. That Arkansas team is only a 7-point underdog to an LSU team that beat Alabama last week. I take that back. A 3-point underdog to an LSU team that beat Alabama last week. Now, Liberty's only a 14.5-point favorite over UConn. So does that, by translative properties, make UConn a pretty decent football team? I think that it should. Fighting for bowl eligibility. They probably won't get a win here. They probably won't get a win next week. They will need to pull an upset against either this Liberty team or next week at Army, but they have a shot to go bowling here. The UConn Huskies and Liberty, on the flip side, could break into the top 25 if they move to 9-1. That would be great for the Flames. They still have an outside track to make a New Year's 6 bowl game. Now, also at noon, ESPNU. South Florida's 1-8. They're hosting SMU, who's 5-4. This Mustangs team that put up 77 points against Houston last week. So there could be points again, just saying. And then a few just kind of garbage Power 5 games. Michigan State's 4-5, hosting Rutgers, who's 4-5 on the Big Ten Network. Just teams fighting for bowl eligibility. Duke is 6-3, hosting Virginia Tech at 2-7 on ESPN3. Now, Duke has won 2 straight road games, but they were against Virginia Tech and Miami. So they've hit bowl eligibility. It's been a real struggle, though. This might be the last winnable game on the regular season slate, with a road game to Pittsburgh and a home game against Wake Forest upcoming. But the Dukies, a decent season for that squad there. And finally, Virginia's 3-6. They're hosting Pittsburgh, who's 5-4 on the ACC network. Pitt's a 4-point favorite here. Now, last week they were without Israel, their top running back, in a victory over Syracuse, but the backup still went for over 100 yards. So I wouldn't expect them to have too much trouble against a Virginia team that struggled the entire season. Now, some of your at least flippable games here, your games worth checking out for a little bit. On CBS, the game is going to be the 8-1 Tennessee Vols against Missouri, who's 4-5. Now, the Vols can still make the playoffs, but they do have to win out. Missouri has lost 4 one-possession games this season, including the horrible 21-17 Kentucky game last week. Missouri was down 4 points. They were going to get the ball back on a Kentucky punt with about 2.5 minutes left to go in the game. Colin Goodfellow, the punter, had the ball snapped over his head. He had to scramble all the way back to the 2-yard line, his own 2-yard line, to grab the ball. The problem for Missouri here, as you know, they would have gotten the ball around there had they completed a tackle or the punt not got away. And it was real close because Mr. Will Norris, the linebacker, was down there and made the tackle on the punter. The problem was he made a quick motion to spin around and boot the ball away as the tackler was going into motion to take him down. So in that time, he established himself as a punter and not a ball carrier, recovering a fumble. So it went from just a tackle, where Missouri might have gotten the ball on the 2-yard line, to a roughing the kicker call that gave Kentucky an automatic first down and the ball back. Terrible, horrible circumstance. It was the right call. Now, Missouri did end up getting the ball back after they switched to long snappers and put in a backup kicker because Goodfellow's leg was busted on the snap, on the tackle, which is horrible for him. But they did not have enough time left, or timeouts, to drive the field with about 30-something odd seconds left to score a touchdown to win the game. So just a crazy ending to Missouri that at one point had Auburn beat on a walk-in touchdown that was fumbled out of bounds. At one point in the season, they had a lead on Georgia that they ended up losing to by 4 points earlier in the season. Missouri's had a number of opportunities here. The offense just isn't very good, but the defense should be able to get some pressure on Hendon Hooker. They were able to do some things to make Georgia uncomfortable, and I think that they'll be able to certainly hang in this ball game, at least for a little bit. Tennessee, I think, will be able to recover and not just be shell-shocked from last week. I think this is actually too good of a team for that. But I'll be watching a little bit of this football game. It's the CBS Nooner. I do have number 16, Illinois, who's 7-2. They're hosting Purdue, who's 5-4. This is on ESPN2. This game would be more interesting if both teams didn't lose at home last week and look pitiful in doing so. Now, Illinois is 4-2 in the Big Ten West. Behind them are Purdue, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota, all at 3-3. So if Purdue pulls an upset, there'll be some weird math going on for the league leader and tiebreakers and stuff like that. But Purdue could have a chance to jump possibly in front there. Now, Aiden O'Connell, Purdue's quarterback, 1 touchdown, 5 picks in the past 2 weeks against Wisconsin and Iowa's defenses. His completion percentage on the year is all the way down to 64%. He was supposed to be a difference maker on the offensive side of the ball for this football team, and it's been a struggle bus here. So, Illinois struggled to put points on the board against Michigan State last week. They were 1 for 6 on 4th down, and they had a turnover, so 5 turnovers on down, and a pick, I believe it was. So just rough, just a horrid time for that offense as well. This could turn into a snoozer. It could be an interesting little battle if either offense gets going here, because there is some talent on both of these teams. I'm just not sure, how much excitement you're going to get out of watching it. But that's on ESPN2 at noon. ESPN2 at noon, Purdue and Illinois out of the Big Ten. Now, finally, I have on your top watch for the noon slate, which again is a little light here. I have that Arkansas LSU game, and LSU is only favored by a field goal here at the moment, which has been a little strange for the talking heads on the radio, I will say that. This is the ESPN game. KJ Jefferson for Arkansas has been banged up all season. He should be in for this game. I assume that's why the line is where it is, and it's not a larger spread towards LSU's side. He was 23 for 37 for 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks last week against Liberty. He did have a handful of yards on the ground, of course, in this option offense. Now, he was stuffed on the game-tying 2-pointer, which is why the Razorbacks lost. They can still get pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They had 4 sacks last week, but the defense is just not good. LSU will have an opportunity to certainly run the ball here, which is not a strength of theirs, but if Jaden Daniels can get outside of the pocket, run around, he'll have plenty of opportunities to do so, and it'd just be interesting to see if LSU takes a loss right after beating Alabama here. So they certainly could lose to Arkansas. It'd be a good recovery for this team, which has had a tough season. If KJ doesn't play for some reason, then maybe you're just kind of channel flipping through the noon games, because LSU might just take that game pretty early in the first half there and run away with it. Now your afternoon slate. Let's hit some of the notables here. At 2 o'clock, Rice is 5-4. They're heading to play the Hilltoppers of West Kentucky, 6-4. ESPN Plus. The Hilltoppers are only 13-point favorites here. That's a little respect towards the Owls, I believe. Now they're 1 win away from bowl eligibility, so that's great for Rice. They haven't done that since 2014, so it'll be great for them to bring in the new year with a bowl game, but they'll have to earn it. Austin Reed, since popping up from Division II or Division III football, is now 2nd in Division I in passing yards. How about that? At 3 o'clock, Houston's 5-4. They're hosting 3-6 Temple. This is also on ESPN Plus. The Cougars came out on the wrong side of that 77-63 SMU shootout last week. They've fallen back in the American race. They could have been squarely in the contest if they've grabbed a win there. And on the flip side, looks like the offense is working a little bit and the defense is not. So they'll win here against Temple. So you can check that out, I suppose. 3:30 Big 12 action. We'll see Oklahoma State, who is 6-3. They'll be hosting Iowa State, who's 4-5 on ESPNU. The Cyclones still have one of the best defenses in the Pac-12. It is such a shame they do not have the offensive firepower there to kind of support what they're doing there. Oklahoma State might be healthy. This has been a hell of a fall from grace for that particular team. I assume that Mike Gundy will have this team ready to go against the Cyclones, but if they don't have all the pieces on offense, we've seen how ugly that can be the past couple of weeks. So I'm going to watch a little bit of this game personally, but I'm not going to move that even to my mid-tier watches for the afternoon slate if with as ugly as they've looked recently, going up against a good defense. So, speaking of ugly, Washington State's 5-4. They're hosting Arizona State, who's 3-6 on the Pac-12 network. Washington State has a decent defense, certainly one of the better in the Pac-12. They stopped a 3-game skid by crushing Stanford 52-14 last week, and now they got to play a Fork team that's pretty feisty here in the Sun Devils. 3:30, Michigan. Finally, the number 3 Michigan Wolverines. They're 9-0. They're hosting Nebraska, who's 3-6. This is on ABC. This is not something I'm going to be watching a whole lot of. Nebraska has looked hopeless recently. I'm not sure that Casey Thompson's going to be back for this game. He hasn't practiced on Tuesday. I'm not sure about Wednesday. They had a safety suspended because of a DUI this week. They did play 2 quarterbacks who were combined 11 for 26 this past week against Minnesota, as they stated they would. Not in performance, but they try a 2 quarterback system, and it was effective for nobody, and I'm just not going to watch any of this game. Boston College, 2-7 at number 16, NC State, who's 7-2 on the ACC network. Now, NC State beat Wake Forest 30-21 last week. That was the first time they hit 30 points since hanging 41 on UConn, September 24th. That's how difficult scores have come by for NC State, who's supposed to compete for an ACC championship as one of the potential teams to overtake Clemson. Whew, all these C's mixing in together. As it stands, MJ Jordan looks like a decent, well, certainly an upgrade right now at quarterback for that team, and they're taking on just a Boston College squad that's just praying for the year to end. Nobody can stay healthy for that squad, unfortunately. Also at 3:30, Iowa's 5-4. They're hosting Wisconsin, who's now 5-4. This is on FS1. This is borderline a move up to a real game you can flip over to, but the offenses are pretty gross. Now, Petrus was actually one of the better performing quarterbacks in the Big Ten last week, with some, weather factors in play for most of those games, and CJ Stroud performing horribly, and Northwestern not playing well, and Minnesota not playing well, and just we had some gross stat lines in the Big Ten. And Michael Petrus quietly had a couple touchdowns. The first time all year he'd had 2 touchdowns. I think it was his 4th highest completion percentage, his 3rd most yards thrown for all year, something like that. Just excellent, all things considered, for Iowa. And now they get Wisconsin in here, who's, of course, made a switch up at head coach and is actually looking like a more vigorous team since the move. So, and they're 1.5-point favorites on the road. So this will be a close football game. Will it be fun to watch, or is this one you just want to check the box score and see what's going on? That's why I have it this far down as a game you might want to check on if nothing else is really panning out. Speaking of things not panning out, we have our only team who hasn't won a game in the United States, Northwestern, 1-8. They're traveling to Minnesota, who's 6-3 on the Big Ten Network at 3:30. Maybe Tanner Morgan will be back. I don't know. Won't be watching. 3:30 as well. Georgia Tech's 4-5. They're hosting Miami, who's 4-5 on ESPN3. Both games fighting for bowl eligibility. Georgia Tech is not good, but it is surprising that they fire a coach and they've won a couple games and they're still in the hunt to make a postseason game. That's stunning, quite frankly. So is Miami at 4-5, although we knew there'd be some turnover there and they'd have to Mario Cristobal would have to figure some things out there. But with the success we've seen at Oregon and LSU, it's unfortunate to see this team all the way down at 4-5, and Tyler Van Dyke banged up, sometimes not playing. He's supposed to be a potential NFL player. We'll see if he's even on the field this week. Also at 3:30, Troy is 7-2. They're hosting 3-5 Army. This is your fun NFL Network game. Now, Troy hanging around the Sun Belt race. They've got a little something on both sides of the ball. Not a bad non-Power 5 watch there. Also at 3:30, UTSA is 7-2. Frank Harris again dragging this team with a top 15 offense against Louisiana Tech. They're 3-6. This is on ESPN+. Also, North Texas, they're 6-4. Another top 15 offense. They're playing against UAB, who's 4-5. And the Blazers are favored by almost a touchdown here against North Texas, mostly because that defense on the back end is horrific. But North Texas is 5-1 in Conference USA play, still in the hunt there. I have a TBD as far as the TV network. I assume it'll be ESPN Plus, but another non-Power 5 game that could be a little interesting there. Though we have several teams worth keeping on the flicker here, the flipper over at the mid-level here in the afternoon, starting at 3:30. Number 14, Penn State, 7-2, hosting Maryland, who's 6-3 on Fox. I guess Tulia Tagovailoa did play last week against Wisconsin. I just didn't notice it. I was certainly on one of my televisions, but it was a hell of a boring game. He was 10 for 22 for 77 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 pick. So basically non-existent, and a 23-10 loss. He had returned after a couple game absence. Just not a good look at all. Penn State's only a 10-point favorite, but I don't expect Maryland to be able to score if Tulia isn't fully healthy. If he is ready to go, though, throwing the football, the Terps, we've seen the blueprint to be able to run the football on them as well, and this could be a game in striking distance of an upset. I'm just not quite sure that I expect that. It should still be an interesting ball game, but we've seen Penn State on the flip side explode a couple times and beat the hell out of teams. Their only losses, again, are Michigan and Ohio State. So the flip side of this narrative is if Maryland is able to come in, look good, possibly pull an upset, then we'll have a 7-3 Terrapin team hosting Ohio State next week, with them maybe looking ahead to Michigan. So a little bit of a sneaky game there. But on the road here against Penn State on Fox, an interesting game if Tulia comes in healthy. The 3:30 ESPN game is going to be number 10 Clemson, who's now 8-1. They are hosting Louisville, who is 6-3. Now Clemson is a 7-point favorite over Louisville, and this Cardinals team has won 4 straight games, all by 14+ points at Virginia, Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, James Madison. They forced 15 turnovers against the 3 ACC opponents. That's average of 5 per game there. Then they held James Madison to less than 200 yards last week. The offensive side isn't very good, but they might be able to hang with Clemson if they're both struggling on the offensive side. We might actually see a quarterback change for Clemson now the DJ's kind of struggled for 2 games in a row now, including the one just out of the bye week last week against Notre Dame, and that was a bad look. I'm not sure Cade Klubnik is in any better shape right now to really make a difference on the offense, but man, bad performance by Clemson, and the Louisville defense is looking really good right now, and this could be a ball game, surprisingly, out of nowhere. After Malik Cunningham and that offense was supposed to carry this Cards team, and they struggled early, it's the defense that's helping carry them towards the postseason. At 4 o'clock, Florida's 5-4. They're hosting South Carolina, who is 6-3 on the SEC network. Florida's favored by 8, which doesn't seem like a big enough line considering South Carolina beat Vanderbilt by only a couple scores last week. Now, South Carolina's been scoring with special teams. The offense isn't good. The defense isn't good. The rattler isn't rattling. It's just a tough time there in Coxville. The Florida, on the other hand, I got to tell you, I was watching Anthony Richardson from time to time, flipping over to that game against Texas A&M last week, and I was like, man, he looks pretty good. This might be his most complete game. He looked good passing the football. He looked good running the football. None of those things have happened at the same time all season. And he looked good and comfortable at doing a lot of things. And then I realized Texas A&M, once I put the sound on, had 30-plus players out with the flu. A third of the roster wasn't even playing the damn football game. So I guess good for Anthony Richardson. Good to see him developing. And I hope he can beat a fully rostered South Carolina team this week. But it'd be nice to see him continue to progress and play a good football game here. It's possible on the flip side that South Carolina is able to exploit a Florida team. It's prone to mistakes and is certainly beatable. But I hope we're seeing glimpses of Anthony Richardson starting, to see what he's going to look like heading into next year. He had 4 touchdowns accounted for. He was 17 for 28 passing, 201 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. And the running backs are still producing there as well. The freshman Trevor Etienne and the sophomore Montrell Johnson have been just monsters, and they were last week as well. So I think the Gators might just eat some cock up this week and be just fine. Though I have 2 games in the 3:30 slot as top viewing. The first one's no surprise. Number 11, Ole Miss at 8-1, hosting number 9, Alabama at 7-2 on CBS. Now there seems to be a little concern that Alabama's calling it a year and might not try in this game. There might not be as much effort. I can't see that. Nick Saban's all about effort. Lane Kiffin's going to be coming for their neck, and it's certainly a rivalry game there. Ole Miss is coming off a bye. They're trying to give the Tide their 3rd loss in 4 weeks, and I certainly don't know if that's going to sit well with the Tide there. Now there's the ground game that's going to work and be very effective, I think, at times against Alabama. The offense for the Tide, of course, is just Bryce Young running around trying to make plays work. So it's entirely possible that we do see an upset here. I think more than ever, there's a real blueprint in order to beat Alabama. The freshman running back for the Rebels, Quinshon Judkins, there we go. The freshman back there is just a monster. 13 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards, 5.8 yards per carry. Just a beast there. And he'll be getting the ball a whole lot. And let's not forget Zach Evans. 6.3 yards per carry, 7 touchdowns, 680 yards on the season as well. Jackson Dart getting in the mix, not something you saw in his brief time at USC. And I just think that Alabama's going to have a whole lot to be concerned about. Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back, is their top receiver as well, still there. And it's just going to be an interesting watch to see if Alabama does indeed go down again and Lane Kiffin gets a big win. It's going to be a barn burner, I think. I think we stay within that spread, definitely, of 12 points for Alabama. And that also means that Ole Miss will technically stay in the SEC race, although they did lose to LSU earlier in the season, so LSU is still in the driver's seat to actually make the title game. But Ole Miss still has a shot, still lurking around there. So I think this will be a really good football game and a really intriguing from a storyline perspective. And the other game I have, also interesting from a storyline perspective, is of course the non-Power 5 matchup we have going on. Number 17 Tulane is 8-1, 5-0 in the American Conference, and number 22 UCF is 7-2, 4-1 in the American Conference. The winner will have the clearest path to a New Year's Six bowl game and play in the American Conference Championship game, of course. Now, Tulane is only favored by 1.5 points at home here against Central Florida. I think Central Florida is the better football team. They are 7th in the country in offense. And although John Rice Lee has been out, it's Mikey Keene who's been in at quarterback, and he's been just fine. They have been just fine. This is a good football team, and they're better on both sides of the ball than Tulane, quite frankly. And I think that they're going to have an opportunity to go on the road and grab a big win here. Again, the spread is 1.5. It's close to a coin flip here. So I don't know which quarterback is going to be in for Central Florida. They will continue to run the ball, which is something that you can do on Tulane. That is their weakness. They're much better against the pass in Tulane's offense. If you take the ball away from them, that's not a particularly potent attack there. They'll try to run on the flip side of things, and I think Central Florida is going to have an opportunity to really shut them down and win the football game outright. But it's going to be good either way, and it is important for the New Year's Six determination. Of course, Liberty, I think, could still be in the mix there. Coastal Carolina, we'll touch on in a second. They might be out of the mix, but those are kind of your top teams in that conversation there. All right, the packed evening slate starts at 7 o'clock. Kansas is 6-3. They play at Texas Tech, who's 4-5. This is on the Big 12 network and the ESPN Plus network, and this is on the lower slate, just worth keeping an eye on. I think it's going to be a good football game, but we have a lot better things on the schedule here. Jalen Daniels, hopefully, will be in for Kansas. Not sure about that yet. Don't know who's going to quarterback at all for Texas Tech. But again, a good defense there. Hopefully, Jalen will be back for Kansas. Could be a really fun, exciting ball game there for two teams just hoping to make bowl games there. Also at 7 o'clock, Florida International's 4-5, hosting Florida Atlantic, who's 4-5. Two teams just fighting for bowl eligibility. The SEC Network game is 7:30, is 2-3-6 teams, Auburn hosting Texas A&M, and the Tigers are favored by 1.5. That's how bad it is. More players might be affected from the flu that went around Texas A&M last week, so they might have more people out. So it just really sounds like that's going to be an ugly football game. Now 7:30 as well, ESPNU. Coastal Carolina's 8-1. They're hosting Southern Mississippi, who is 5-4. Coastal's favored by 5. I was really wondering what the line was going to be because news just came out that Grayson McCall will miss the rest of the season with an ankle injury. Well, 3 to 6 weeks, I should say. The rest of the regular season, which is horribly unfortunate. He could be back for a bowl game potentially. He has 2,314 yards on the season, 21 touchdowns, 1 interception. He is this team's top player. He has been for several years. He has this team number 1 in the East Division and the Sun Belt. He set the record for passing efficiency in last year, 2021, breaking Tua's previous record. So hopefully we get at least one more game of his awesome career that's gone completely under the radar, other than when they briefly broke into the top 25 poll in 2021 and the back end of 2020, I believe. Hopefully we see him in uniform one more time for the Chanticleers. But that game without him, and Southern Miss, I think, still in the mix there. That game is at 7:30 on ESPNU. Now, the mid-level games I have here, 7 o'clock, Baylor 6-3. They're hosting number 19 Kansas State, who is 6-3 on FS1. At this point, it really doesn't matter who the quarterback is. Adrian Martinez should be healthy and fine to go. But if Howard made an appearance, it wouldn't be the worst thing for Kansas State. Deuce Vaughn still back there, quarterback as well. They had the horrible loss to Texas last week, and they could have had that game. Just terribly unfortunate for that team. Baylor beat Oklahoma in another higher scoring affair that we're used to seeing. That stayed in the 30s, but still, they still have a chance to make the Big 12 championship game due to the schedule being backloaded here. They have this Kansas State team, TCU, and Texas still on the schedule. Again, the defense, not what it was last year, but Blake Shapen and that offense have things kind of rolling there, and they'll be able to possibly make the championship game if they can get a big win over Kansas State here. So this is a big, big ball game for Baylor. Kansas State will be in a bowl game, certainly, but they're a little bit out of the mix here for the Big 12 Conference Championship game due to some of the losses they've taken, but that's 7 o'clock on FS1. The next game on the slate is number 1 Georgia at Mississippi. The Bulldogs here are 6-3 now. This is the 7 o'clock night ESPN game. Now, this Bulldogs team rallied last week, really, and won in overtime over this horrible Auburn Tiger team to win in overtime 39-33. They had 3 turnovers. Auburn had 14 penalties for over 100 yards in a wild game. But the point is the Bulldogs had to pull that game off. Otherwise, they'd be in a 3-game skid at this point. They've kind of fallen down to earth after a great start where they won 5 of their first 6, and the only loss was coming on the road at LSU. Now they've lost at Kentucky, at Alabama, and just had to tough it out against Auburn here. And it's going to be a tough game. They're 16-point underdogs to UGA, but the Bulldogs have to go on the road now and go against a team that can certainly put the ball in the air. And Mike Leach has stated he wants to try and run on Georgia this week as well. So I'm not sure that either of those teams will really be accomplished. Either of those things, I should say, not either of those teams. I'm not sure that Mississippi will be accomplished on this particular day, but just worth keeping an eye on there. And at 8 o'clock, Syracuse is 6-3. They're hosting the 6-3 Seminoles of Florida State on the ACC network. Now, Florida State's favored by only a touchdown. The offense is top 15 in the country, so I'm really not sure how Syracuse is supposed to hang around here. The Qs have lost 3 straight. The offense has not been good. I'm not sure which quarterback is starting. Florida State scored 40-plus points in both of its past 2 road games, both of its past 2 games against Georgia Tech and Miami, which aren't great teams, but I still think that Syracuse is going to struggle to both slow down Florida State to any great capacity and be able to score on the flip end of that and keep up with them. But an interesting game should things continue to progress in a way that Florida State's inhibited. And just worth watching. Kind of a middle tier, flip over and see how it's going kind of game. High watches. Here we go. I've got a trio of them that are interesting to me. Starting with number 6 Oregon, who's 8-1, hosting number 25 Washington, who's 7-2, with the Ducks coming off a bye. This is the 7 o'clock Fox game, and a big one because the Ducks still have a chance at the playoffs, obviously. Washington's kind of played itself out. None of these teams have good defense at the top of the Pac-12. USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, Utah's defense isn't quite what it is previously. So it's just a struggle bus for all these teams at the top. I think we'll see a whole lot of points here, although Oregon is favored naturally at home against Michael Penix, the leader in passing yards nationally. And Bo Nix is 5th in rushing touchdowns total in the country with 13, I believe. He's just been a monster there, and really a dual threat quarterback for the offense. And it's going to be a problem slowing him down, particularly coming off a bye week, getting ready for this game. Washington State, of course, played in a windstorm against Oregon State at the end of last week. But these two teams, this should be just a lot of points and a fun game. Oregon expected to run away from this one. I think Washington State can keep up for a while. I believe they lost one of their top pass rushers, though, for the year. So that could be a problem there. But Oregon, Bo Nix, this is your chance to kind of step up and continue on your pathway to the playoffs. Almost 2,500 yards, 73% completion percentage, 22 passing touchdowns and 5 picks, 457 rushing yards, and those 13 rushing touchdowns. So have a chance at a Heisman still too. That's still on the board. Now the other big game, of course, it's 7:30. Number 18 Texas is 6-3. They're hosting TCU, who's ranked 4th and 9-0. On ABC. Texas is favored by touchdown on the road. They're favored again this week on the road against a team that's ranked higher than them and has a better record. Now we have some Horned Frog health concerns, or some FHSCs, if you will. Max Duggan's been banged up but expected to play. Quinston Johnson missed the entire game last week after getting hurt in the first couple plays. He's expected to practice this week. And the starting linebacker, Marcel Brooks, is going to miss the rest of the year. One of the few impact players on the defensive side of things. So if any other pieces are gone, if Duggan is out, if Johnson is out, they're going to have a lot of problems for TCU. On the flip side, Texas, can Quentin Ewers finally pull a good game out of his hat and get things done? He didn't really get it done against Kansas State last week. It was a fumble by the offense that kind of cost them, the Wildcats, that win. And he just needs to execute. He just needs to execute. I realize he's a young guy. Bijan Robinson got the ball 30 times last week. And Xavier Worthy, of course, a great perimeter threat there. But TCU, a healthy TCU team can go toe-to-toe with Texas. And I'm just not sure that they'll be healthy for this football game. And it is on the road. If I were Texas, I would take the ball out of Ewers' hands altogether and just let Bijan Robinson and Roche Johnson, the backup running back, take the ball 50 combined times for this game. We know it's not going to happen, but there's certainly a pathway for Texas to win this game and cover comfortably. But TCU, as long as they have a healthy threat there in Johnston, is going to be a dangerous team. But hopefully we get some healthy players here, and this is a good football game. Obviously, there's ramifications for who's in the Big 12 championship game. Could be both these teams. Who's going to be in the playoffs? Could still be TCU, although if they take a loss, it could be much more difficult for them to climb back up into the top 4. So this is a monster game, 65-point over-under on this one. So just big ramifications all over the place. Good football players, hopefully healthy football players, and just a big-time game here at 7:30 on ABC. The other game I want to touch on, which is not going to be talked about as much in the national media, is the 7:30 ESPN2 game. Wake Forest is 3.5-point favorites at home. They're 6-3 against 8-1, number 15th ranked North Carolina. The over-under 77 freaking points in this game. Of course, defense is not the highlight of either of these squads. As a matter of fact, if they can end up in that neutral in a football game as opposed to just a leaky paper bag on the backside, then that'll help them win the football game. The problem is Sam Hartman has had 9 turnovers the past 2 games, to the point where they benched him last week. It's been a horrible problem. They were both road losses. It was at Louisville, at NC State, 2 teams with better defenses. So it's possible he just flips the script and has a great week against a porous defense this week. Drake May, we know, is very possible doing the same thing. Maybe the turnover problems don't quite go away. Either direction, there should be a lot of points in this football game. There's expected to be a lot of points, but North Carolina needs to get a big win here. They're still runaway favorites to make at least the Coastal, to win the Coastal and make the ACC championship game. Not much is going to stop them from that. And this is actually an Atlantic and Coastal crossover, so even a loss won't hurt them here, but it will keep them out of the playoffs. So this is still a lot of big circumstances and metrics and important things on the slate here for North Carolina, and a high-scoring affair here. So if Texas TCU isn't quite the speed, if Washington Oregon gets too lopsided with the Ducks' way or something goes bonky there, then this game, I'm going to be rotating between the 3. I think this is going to be just an under-the-radar kind of football game. Now, the late-night slate is a little bit more what you expect. 3 Mountain West games, 3 Pac-12 games. It tips off at 9 o'clock on the Pac-12 network. Squirreled away, it will be Oregon State at 6-3 hosting California, who's 3-6. Oregon State's favored by 14 in this game, which seems about appropriate. They had lost at Washington in that windy game last week, 24-21. Tough break for the Beavs after going on a nice 3-game win streak there. California has now lost 5 in a row, and it's just a tough spill for that team. Not that they were expected to make a bowl game this week or this year, but just a tough skid for that team that looked like they had a good offense earlier in the year. Beat UC Davis, UNLV, lost by 1 touchdown at Notre Dame, beat Arizona, and now just in kind of in free fall there. So Oregon have a good chance to pick up a W here before playing at Arizona State and potentially moving to 8-3 before playing Oregon in the season finale. Next up on the slate, the ESPN game is going to be number 13 Utah at 7-2 hosting Stanford at 3-9. That's at 10 o'clock. Utah's favored by a comfortable 24 points. That's a big number. This is one of the few teams that's really been kind of rolling teams. After beating USC a few weeks back, they've won 2 more since. Washington State by 4, Arizona by 25, and they are one of the few teams that I wouldn't think would have too many problems with Stanford, but who knows? The Cards have been in a few battles that they shouldn't have won this season. At 10:30 on Fox, number 12, UCLA coming off a bye to tangle with Arizona. The next high-flying matchup on the slate, as I just said, none of these top teams play a whole lot of defense. 77.5 point over-under. I believe that's higher than the USC over-under was set. UCLA's favored by 19.5, but we should see a whole lot of points in this one. Not a whole lot else to see here in Pasadena. 10:30, Boise State 6-3, traveling to Nevada, who's 2-7 on the CBS Sports Network. Now, Boise State's the one team out here in this particular group that could find itself in a little bit dicey situation. They were undefeated in conference play. Well, they still are, but they lost to BYU in a kind of a shocker last week, 31-28, after BYU's had such a tough time this season. The young freshman Talon Green still had a couple touchdowns. This is a good job by him. He's looked like a good quarterback. But this team's compiled wins over San Diego State, Fresno State with no Jake Heingert quarterback, at Air Force against Colorado State, teams that haven't been very good, yet there's no one else good on the schedule either. At Nevada, at Wyoming, home against Utah State. Just not a good Mountain West conference, and they'll have an opportunity to beat the Nevada Wolfpack here. Next up on the slate, we head back to the Pac-12. No, I take that back. All Mountain West from here on out. 10:30 FS1. San Jose State is 6-2. 4-1 the Mountain West. San Diego State's 5-4. They are 3-2 in the Mountain West. San Jose State has won 2 in a row over Nevada and Colorado State, so they will be looking for their third here over at San Diego State team that continues to lose every game that requires more than 23 points to win. So that's about where you set your bar there. Now, San Jose has the same record as Fresno State does in the West Division, but they lost to them. However, they can stay in the hunt here with a win over San Diego State and potentially make the Mountain West Conference Championship. That's still in play. So a win here would be good for that team. So something still on the line here. The Aztecs, another spot behind Bat. So still in play here for both of these teams, the Mountain West race on FS1 at 10:30. Finally, at 11 o'clock, Utah State is 4-5. They're playing Hawaii at 2-8. That is a game that will be on your television screen, although it's not particularly interesting. So there you go. Late night, 3 Pac-12, 3 Mountain West. I would recommend the UCLA-Arizona game for some points and some excitement, but all those will be options for you. All right, your top watches of the weekend, and I think your number one game that you're going to want to check out is Texas and TCU. I've knocked on the Longhorns numerous times, but I think that's going to be the game to see. I do like North Carolina and Wake Forest at the same time slot. I like Washington, Oregon. I like Ole Miss and Alabama, so those are all in play, but I think Texas and TCU, if you're sitting down to watch one game, check that one out in the evening, both for conference, New Year's Six, and playoff implications, and for quality football. Just hope everyone's healthy in that football game that can really make an impact. Now, next up, Audible. And I put that in the noon slot with all the stuff that's going on, and no really top game there. And I have that Tennessee game. Number 1, Tennessee hosting Missouri in that noon slot there. And I just want to see, I think the Vols will certainly win, but I just would not overlook Missouri and how they've looked against much better competition this year. And even that's a little debatable at this point with the way that they're losing football games. So I'd like to see how that works out, flipping through the noon slate of games, how Missouri hangs in there with Tennessee and how Tennessee is able to bounce back after the tough game against Georgia. Underrated game. I like Baylor again this week. Baylor and Oklahoma were my pick last week, although they were on the weird ESPN Plus, Big 12 networks. And I like Baylor again this week. Baylor and number 19, Kansas State on FS1. They're in that evening window there. Again, that's kind of loaded though, but there's a number of games in the afternoon. Clemson and Louisville is going to be on ESPN, so I guess that's a higher billing game technically, but that's going to be a good game. Tulane and Central Florida, obviously. There's a lot of games that either could be good or could not be as interesting. So there's a lot of options, but I'm going with underrated as Baylor and Kansas State. Now my check-in game. Check in and see how it's going. Now Missouri and Tennessee could have honestly been a candidate for that, but the one that I'm going to go with here is actually Maryland and Penn State, which I did have as a mid-level game in the afternoon. But just to further highlight that, if Maryland's able to get Tulia Tagovailoa back as a healthy quarterback and notch a big win on the road, that would be great for them. But even to play a competitive football game there against Penn State, that'd be great. Penn State probably running the football with that great back and Nicholas Singleton, the freshman. Maybe we'd get some Drew Aller, the true freshman quarterback as well, if Sean Clifford struggled or had some issues. So not that I'm wishing for that, just a good football game. But that is my check-in game. Maryland and Penn State in the 3:30 slot. For small screen, the easy pick would be UCF and Tulane, but I think that's too easy. I mean, obviously that would be the game to highlight. But I'm going to go with Connecticut and Liberty in the noon slot. Two teams who've done very well. Liberty, who could still make a top 25 game. It's a little out there, but they still have an opportunity. And Connecticut, who could just make a bowl game. So two teams there that are doing quite well. So I choose that one. And finally, your late night snack is an easy pick for me as well. It's going to be the UCLA Bruins taking on the mighty Arizona Wildcats, the 10:30 Fox game. So with the 77.5 point over-under in a shootout there. Carbonet at running back and Doris Thomas Robinson at quarterback as well. Two great weapons there for UCLA, who doesn't play a whole lot of defense. Arizona the same way as well with Jaden DeLora. And I think that'll be a great nightcap to the day. So there are your top picks and your watch guide for this upcoming Saturday, November 12th. Thank you for tuning in, and I will talk to you later.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a